Hello, today we begin a new journey, and welcome to my first episode of Retrospective Review. Our first subject is going to be Sonic the Hedgehog for Genesis, developed by Sonic Team and published by Sega. We're starting with Sonic the Hedgehog and going back to where it all really began. This was Sega's big response to Nintendo and Mario, a 16-bit mascot who would lead Sega in the war against Nintendo, and has for quite a while. But we're going to get there eventually. Let's focus on the first game, the introduction of Sonic the Hedgehog. Before we begin though, this is what I'm calling a retrospective review. Allow me to explain that. The idea here isn't to review the game and its qualities on its own, or for the time period it came out, but rather look at what the game is and what it means to the series or franchise it finds itself in, and how it stands out. Is it worth a replay today, or should it maybe sit on the shelf of collectors while there's other games we can enjoy? Now, I want to go deeper with these reviews, so to be clear, I'm going to be talking about these games from beginning to end. Be prepared for spoilers on them. But this is a Genesis-era Sonic game, so there's not that much to spoil. I will be showing all levels and bosses, though, so we can see how the game goes. Now, the plan is to have this as a monthly series. I'll be putting up a current schedule. If you're a Sonic fan, and really, who isn't, you'll want to consider subscribing so you can follow the whole series, and ring that bell for notifications as well so you can be the first to see these. The idea is that each month we should be able to cover at least one Sonic game, and the goal is at the end I'll hopefully have covered each Sonic game available on PC. Sonic Spinball and Sonic Blast aren't on the list, but hopefully we can fit it in somewhere. As for the game itself, you can clearly see I am using widescreen mode. I'm currently playing this on the Sega Mega Drive and Genesis collection available on Steam. The collection is actually made by D3T Limited Technology. But I have also played a fair amount on the Sega Genesis Mini just to mix things up. Now with all of that out of the way, we finally can start talking about the game. But I also want to talk a little bit of the historical context because that is important in looking at these games retrospectively. This is, of course, the first Sonic game. This is where it all started. However, it's not the only Sonic the Hedgehog game. Of course, we have Sonic the Hedgehog that was released in 2006, or Sonic 06 as it probably should be called to avoid associating it with this one, or really any of the games in the series. But that's not what I mean. So let's call this one Sonic the Hedgehog 1991. That's easy and there's no confusion, right? Well, not exactly. That's not the only Sonic the Hedgehog from 1991. There was actually a Game Gear / Master System version of this game. Admittedly, different levels and much weaker graphics. I actually don't have a copy of that game anymore. I admit I played it long ago when it first came out. But it came out a half a year after the game on the screen. So since there's a lot of confusion possible, just realize we're talking about the Genesis Sonic the Hedgehog. It's the original game. It's a true beginning of Sonic. In addition, this game was released in 1991. The Genesis was actually released in 1988 and 1989, depending on which region you're in. So realize that the system had already been out 2 years, closer to even 3 years. Just realize this wasn't a launch title. This was actually kind of a mature system by this point. So how did Sonic get made? Well, there was actually a call to give this system a mascot. Naoto Oshima, if I'm saying that right, which I'm probably not, created our little blue hedgehog friend. And there's, of course, multiple versions of the hedgehog, and I'm not going to go too far into that history. The important thing to realize is that this was created in 1991. Super Mario Bros. 3 had already been out on the inferior hardware of the NES for 2 years prior to this. Nintendo had the lead, as we all know. So the idea was, this was the game that would be the main competition for Nintendo and those plumbers. And of course, I am using the American names for these consoles. Genesis, not Mega Drive. Master System, not Mark III. I'm American. I grew up with these consoles with those names. Sorry to the other countries, but I hope you understand and hopefully you can follow along. Maybe one day we can actually dive into that history. But the fact that I want to bring up is, this became a best-selling title for the Genesis, perhaps the one title above all else that the Genesis was known for. Though, before we crown that fact, it was also a pack-in title for the system, and that is why it got so many sales. It's not to say it wasn't great for the time, but those numbers get quite inflated. Wii Sports is a great game, but I don't think it's the best game ever on Nintendo Wii. It just came with the console, that's why it has high sale numbers. Now, the game has been playing for a while, but before we dive in, one last thing, I want to challenge you with a little puzzle. Think of the original Sonic the Hedgehog levels. You can use a comment for this or a piece of paper if you have it. Just write down each level or zone that you remember from the original game. I'm going to give you a few moments and one hint. There are 7 zones. And as you're writing, I'll tell you I actually have some data on this. I asked a bunch of people, and we'll see what they say by the end as well. Now that we're done, hopefully you finished writing. If not, pause the video. Let's see how many you actually remember. We obviously have been playing Green Hills, and I think that's an easy one for most Sonic fans. The flow of Sonic the Hedgehog zones from the first game is pretty simple. You start with 3 acts per zone, with the final act having a boss. There are going to be exceptions to this that we'll come to, but rinse and repeat. There are 7 zones here that we have to go through as mentioned. And like I said, Green Hill Zone is the first. It's the iconic location for the franchise. It's the level everyone probably knows from Sonic, which is actually interesting because it's rarely called Green Hills in later games. This is actually the Green Hills level. But this is pretty much what we already know. Jumping piranhas, insect attackers, and more. There's actually a few traps here to get players ready for the game. There's the rotating spike wood poles, the spikes that you can fall on, and bottomless pits. It's a standard level, but it also gets players prepared for what Sonic will have for them. It would be hard to die in this level. It's just so easy. Oh, dang. Yeah, there's a few annoying traps in this level, but overall it's a solid level and what people should expect from Sonic. Oddly enough, it's actually not the standard for this game. Now the zone ends with the first of our fights against Robotnik and his ball of steel, or rather multicolored brown shadings. He swings it back and forth, and honestly, it's one of the easier fights for one of the easier levels. Don't worry, the game will get harder, quite a bit harder, but this is what amounts to almost like a tutorial level during the Genesis era of gaming. Following our relatively tame first level, we come to our first real challenge, Marble Zone. We enter ruins filled with lava and destroyed marble columns, and it also has a major change to the gameplay. Whereas the first level is really quite easy to run through from beginning to end, Marble Zone and its large areas of lava make it dangerous to dash quickly through the level. We even have some lava lighting, some grass platforms on fire, we have spike traps and more throughout this level. And there's few places you accidentally can get squished and instantly die as well. There's also far fewer checkpoints on most of the levels in Marble Zone, and few interesting points, such as this tight hallway with a lava flow right behind it. But this is also a great platforming level. Sonic might not be able to speed through it, but it just shows off that Sonic's controls are far better than they deserve to be for the time period. The final boss of the Marble Zone keeps with the theme. We have a Robotnik drone with it dropping lava on a pair of small platforms. A relatively easy fight, but still a good battleground. A small note though, the widescreen version of the game actually adds some extra area for this fight. Following up Marble Zone is Springyard Zone. Now if you originally thought that Casino Zone was part of Sonic the Hedgehog, sorry, that's in the sequel. This is as close as you're going to get from Sonic the Hedgehog. There's still almost a casino motif going on with this level though, with the number of bumpers that appear. And while the bumpers will one day become a mainstay in the series and appear in most levels, in Sonic the Hedgehog they're relegated to just this one zone. From humble beginnings grows the great bumper. Now there are some annoying spots, such as the start of one level where it just tries to bounce you back. This is just to show what a bumper can do. Remember, people hadn't seen these before this point, and it can be annoying though. There's also this part of the stage near the end with a lot of jumps in a bottomless pit. It's a slow section of the stage. There's actually quite a few of these styles of motion throughout the game, and it's the one thing that I think players don't really remember about Sonic, but we'll talk about that in a bit. The challenge of Sonic the Hedgehog though is finally here. Springyard Zone is where the game starts to get properly challenging, and this is the bar the rest of the game pretty much uses. Marble Zone might have some tricks, but this is where players will start needing to memorize a level if they want to survive it. And Springyard Zone actually ends with Spike Robotnik, or rather Robotnik with a spike. This seems really challenging and can be if you don't have a strategy, but the strategy is really disappointing. I mean, all you do is start on the leftmost brick, wait until he attacks, hit him. Sometimes hit him twice if you can. Move to the leftmost brick, remain, rinse, wash, repeat. It's rather an easy boss. Now, in the list of levels that you wrote down, did you write water level of some sort? Everyone thinks of that when people talk about the bad Sonic levels, and the first game doesn't disappoint. Here we have Labyrinth Zone. It is the infamous water zone for the first game, but it's also trying to be a little more maze-like with its name. I know people hate water levels in the Sonic series and find them stress-inducing, but I'm going to make a case that this one isn't so bad. There's actually only a few points where it's impossible to get a breath of air, and those points are really the exception. There's also this massive waterfall in the third act. Honestly, not a bad part of the level, but an interesting part. It actually loops, and while it's a little annoying to bounce off of, you need to hold right and jump to make the jumps, it's also interesting. You see, it loops, and I know it's probably not the first game ever to have a looping vertical corridor, but it's done at speed, and it's a rather clever puzzle for the game. Now, Labyrinth Zone ends with the weakest boss in the game, if we can even call it that. Robotnik just decides to run at the end of the zone up a thin shaft behind bricks he probably shouldn't be able to pass. Now, this is a hard area to clear, but as a boss, it's not. You don't even have to hit Robotnik during this area, just survive, and okay, it's something different, but the water rises here. Overall, it's just a weak part of the game. With that, though, we appear in Starlight Zone, and if you haven't realized it yet, there's really no connection between each of these zones. We're just now in outer space. Okay. Yeah, it's kind of the standard of a NES or Genesis era game. You just throw a bunch of ideas at the game, make levels out of them, and call it a day. Now, Starlight Zone can be a bit annoying. The most annoying thing is, of course, these enemies, the bombs. They don't appear to be able to be attacked. They explode after a short while, so you can just wait them out, but you can't spin into them. At least I couldn't find a way to hit them. The level also has bottomless pits, pinch points, and slow elevators. Overall, I think it's just kind of a weak level setup. However, there are some good level designs to it. This is a level with a little more focus on speed, and there's these seesaws with little spiked balls that are fun to play with, but at this point the levels are more of the same. It's mostly about beating the new challenges. And the final boss of Starlight Zone is Robotnik, who drops the exploding spike balls. Not exactly that terrifying, especially after playing a few levels of the seesaws, but you can use the seesaws that he drops the bombs on to hit the spikes up at him, or use those spikes to launch yourself up and kill him. Again, not a hard fight, but an interesting one. Which brings us to what I'm going to be calling the final area. Yes, it's the 6th zone, but trust me, there's a reason. It's Scrap Brain Zone. It feels like the name is just something they threw together, which also kind of makes sense because much of the level is thrown together. There's a new object, the big circular spinning things that Sonic can run on, but they don't appear that often. As well as some traps, both electric and fire, and some shafts that Sonic can travel up and down. The thing is, this is actually more of a maze or a labyrinth than the actual Labyrinth Zone. However, the first 2 acts are decent levels and quite interesting. And at the end of the 2nd act, everything changes. You find Robotnik and he drops you into a large pit, which is still Act 3 of Scrap Brain Zone, but it actually fits a little bit more with Labyrinth Zone, having a large underwater area for this part of the game. Now, there seems to be 2 ways through this level, I think. One was extremely hard, but the other was pretty easy. Just make sure you take the right path when you have a shot, and you should be fine. At the end of the level, you find this. No boss, just springboards. Okay, let's go up. And suddenly we're in Final Zone. Or is it? Yeah, it is listed as Final Zone, of course, but with no boss to the previous stage, it just feels like a final act for Scrap Brain Zone. Just a boss battle. And here you're going to fight Robotnik one last time. It's the only thing in this level. You know, it's honestly a good enough fight that we've seen it featured in Sonic Mania, but for a final boss, and like I said, the only thing in the level, it's entirely too easy. Just don't get stomped by the machine, don't get hit by the attack, and hit Robotnik when you can. You know, it's a little bit hard to time everything, but you're going to get this. Though it is at the end of the game, and, well, if you die here and don't have any continues, you're going to be going all the way back to the beginning of the game. On the other hand, you can beat Robotnik, and you get the end of the game credits. Admittedly, I didn't have all 6 Chaos Emeralds, so I got the bad ending of the game. I'm okay with that. No, really, I am. The ending here barely changes. You can check out the alternate version on YouTube. It's a nice touch for the game, but a single scene doesn't make for a lot of change. So that is everything in Sonic the Hedgehog. How'd you do on your list? Because here's the thing, I don't think people remember the game as well as they claim. Sure, you might remember a couple of these levels, but I tried it with a few personal friends. They did a good name of naming Sonic the Hedgehog 2 levels when trying to think of these. More on that in a bit. On the other hand, I did post this to a couple subreddits, both r/Sonic and r/Sega. These are the guys who really know these games, so it's not a surprise that they do remember these levels, but of course we can also mention they could have looked them up. Now, admittedly, these are the super fans, these are the guys who should know all these levels, but at the same time, the point I'm trying to make is essentially Sonic the Hedgehog is not the game that people remember the most out of this series. One thing you probably have noticed, though, as I've been playing, is how amazing the animations are in Sonic the Hedgehog. There's actually a good reason that Sonic lived on after this game, and games like maybe Rise Star and others failed in its place. Sonic was extremely well designed and developed by Sega and Sonic Team. There was actually a real love for this character, and I think that's clear with the game. We've actually had 4 generations of consoles since the Genesis, and Sonic is still being made regularly, even though he's no longer a platform's mascot. That's something else, and part of it is how iconic and just detailed this character has always been. I mean, this character has had a plethora of bad games, and Sega continues with them for some reason. There's actually small animations here that really stand out that I want to point out. My personal favorite is how Sonic dangles at the edge of a bridge or a cliff. It's a great little touch, but it adds something really nice to the character. There's even a small flaw to the location of the animation if you look closely, but it's just one of the best animations out there, even with that flaw. Now, Sonic the Hedgehog's level design is also great for the time. Honestly, in the modern era, the randomness of the themes for the levels and the styles here would have been bare minimum required for a game. However, in the 1990s when this game came out, this was a very solid choice of levels and had a strong variety of challenge between each level. While the art and level design are solid for the 1990s, they don't stand out that much. This is what becomes a blueprint for all future Sonic games, but it also leads me to one of the big problems with this game. It's not Sonic 2. Now let me try to explain. Sonic the Hedgehog is the first game in the Sonic series. It was one of the first major titles for Sega, and a pack-in title eventually for the Genesis. But Sonic really became important when Sonic 2 was released, especially with Sonic Tuesday and Sega starting to directly attack Nintendo with their advertising. We will, of course, talk more about Sonic 2, blast processing, Sega does what Nintendo don't next month, even Sonic Tuesday and what it did to the entire industry, but the fact is, everything that Sonic the Hedgehog does well is done better by Sonic 2, and it takes steps to truly push Sonic to the next level and make him worthy of being Sega's mascot for almost 30 years now. Now, the reason why I asked about the list of levels is that most people's levels will remember stuff from the second game. Maybe Emerald Hills, but definitely the Chemical Plant, Aquatic Ruins, Casino Night, Hilltop, Mystic Cave, Oil Ocean, Metropolis, Sky Chase, Wing Fortress, Death Egg, and Egg Gauntlet. Now that's 13 zones. And that also means it's a bigger game with more variety. Now, this being the first game, many important pieces of what makes Sonic an important character are also a bit missing here. While the gameplay works well, it's lacking some minor changes that become essential. The most important thing is, of course, the spin dash. Sonic can't spin dash at all. Ducking and hitting jump just launches Sonic in the air. This is Mario without his jump. This is Link without a sword. The spin dash move is Sonic. That's his move. He has only one, really. Without it, I don't even know what this game is, but it doesn't feel like Sonic, and it's slower because of that. The level design here is good, but many levels are made to be quite slow, possibly due to the fact that there's no way for Sonic to really drive himself forward. This isn't exactly the gameplay players will likely remember from Sonic. Let me break that down a little more, because I think, while there's a lot of people who love Sonic, they don't understand why. You see, Sonic has always been called the fast character, the fastest character. That's somewhat true. But in a majority of his old Genesis games, it's not his speed, which is what makes the games great. Yeah, of course, blast processing, Sega's selling systems, and more. But we should actually ignore the advertisements and look at the games themselves. This is something we will talk about in the future, probably next month, but a majority of levels here aren't exactly speedy. In fact, I would actually only say 2 zones are really about the speed. The water levels are never speedy, of course, but again, I don't think it's actually the speed people hate in them. It's the lack of control. You see, I think Sonic is more popular not for speed, but the control over speed. this might be controversial, but I think Mario running at top speed is almost as fast as Sonic, maybe 10% slower. But he doesn't have as much control over his running, including like the slowing down or the jump heights that he launches at least not always. Sonic can consistently run through most levels, and that's what really differentiates him as a character. But again, that's not really here. It's more in later games, and I swear we will go into this further over this year. The point I want to make, though, is Sonic isn't very fast here, and honestly, I don't think he's as fast as people think. It's one of the places where I think 3D Sonics get into trouble when they make the player give up control or agency over the player to go faster, when that's the wrong choice to make for Sonic. Especially like Sonic 06, Boom, Forces, I mean, you get the idea. They do this a lot. Here, though, if you try to go fast, you end up in a pit or on spikes most of the time. And with limited lives, that's a problem. Oh yes, limited lives. This is a Genesis game, and I will complain more about this when we get to later eras like the Generations game and we still have a live counter. But lives were definitely a thing back in Genesis era, as was high score, which is again something I can forgive on Genesis, but something I think the franchise hangs on to a bit too much. The thing is, Sonic the Hedgehog feels overly stingy about lives. The number of 1-ups I actually found in the game probably could be countable on one hand, and while there's probably more, they're hidden, such as this one that was hiding in a hidden room. Lovely. There's also supposed to be a 1-up for 100 rings. I got this a single time while playing, and that was playing extremely carefully and skillfully on the first level of the game. It's really not easy to get. I found myself topping out around about 50 rings on most levels, which makes sense as that will get players to the special stage. But quickly playing the first level of Sonic 2, I could easily get a couple of 1-ups right out of the gate. That's a major change. What about continues? Well, you can earn those by getting 50 coins in the bonus stage. But this is the bonus stage, and this is painful. It's painful to play, it's painful to look at, and it's just really not fun. If you like this, get help, because no, just knowing this style of bonus stage, I'm glad this one's gone forever. Of course, you can earn Chaos Emeralds here, but that would also mean you have to play these stages, and I do really mean it. They're not fun, they're hard to navigate, and they're just ugly. And let me be clear, I only got a continue one time on these stages. They're not easy to get, and they only appear at the end of a level, so you only have a handful of attempts to get them. As for the Chaos Emeralds, sure, I mean, give them a shot at the end of every stage. The first 2 stages of any zone, you can get a shot there if you have 50 rings, so great. But you get a little bonus scene at the end of the game. There's no Super Sonic in the game, and there's no true reason to collect them all. Also, if you get a checkpoint right in front of the final boss of a zone, there's no, 3 rings that the Sonic series eventually just tosses at players to make the boss a little easier. Instead, you're going to have to backtrack, usually through dangerous areas, to get a couple rings so you can at least take a hit or two. Not the best idea, but I guess it works. What I'm trying to get at, though, is that Sonic the Hedgehog is quite hard. I found myself struggling before I even got to the halfway point of the game. Now, the game is fun and enjoyable, and I would have loved to kick back and play it for a couple of days. But after a couple hours, I knew I might not see it all. The good news is that there is a stage select in the game. Up, down, left, and right, you get a little coin sound, and then you hold A and start on the main menu. Thank God for this. Now, don't get me wrong, of course. The proper way is to beat every level in a Sonic game, which is actually what I did before I would select the next level in the list. But the thing is, the struggle in this game isn't that fun on this era of games. Especially because losing a full run or game over throws you all the way back to the beginning of the game. Even worse is when there's a thing is like a bottomless pit or a spike that you'll have to hit twice, or lava that's almost always a killer. The thing is, with limited lives, losing your game gets more frustrating. There's a reason people threw controllers long ago, and I'm not making an excuse for the action, but without saves, battery backups, or good game designs, games are really frustrating. So is Sonic the Hedgehog good? Oh boy. I mean, okay, I'm going to be honest. That's not what we're here to talk about. The idea here is more, is Sonic the Hedgehog worth playing? And, that's equally hard, actually. You see, this is the origin of the entire franchise. This is where everything started. This is where Sonic began, and great for him. It worked out in the long run. At the same time, I really struggle with this game. Not just the actual struggles with the difficulties, but I think Sonic the Hedgehog is not as good as the rest of the series. Okay, at least the rest of the Genesis series. I'm not going to be nice to some of the later games. Trust me, they do suck. But if you somehow think that I'm wrong on this, and this isn't the worst Genesis or Sega CD Sonic the Hedgehog, feel free to tell me which game is worse, and maybe I'll give you a shout out when I cover that game. The fact, though, is Sonic the Hedgehog is the first Genesis game, but it's also the weakest to me. Oh, and of course, just to be clear, Sonic Spinball and Sonic 3D Blast doesn't count in that list at all. Now, what holds Sonic the Hedgehog, the original game, back is it's all the stuff that the series would figure out in the next 16 months that it would take to create Sonic 2. It doesn't have Tails, which means no two-player mode. It doesn't have the spin dash, which means lacking a lot of speed. The level design is weaker, and there's a lot less variety. The difficulty is higher than where it should be. The boss design isn't awful, but it's definitely lacking. And let's be honest, while that last boss was cool, the other four in this game were typical. There's a reason why I chose next month to be Sonic 2 before we actually start jumping around the eras. It's because I believe Sonic the Hedgehog as a series really started with Sonic 2. As for Sonic the Hedgehog, in hindsight, it's at best a good game, but not exactly a game that you need to play. This is the first, but it's hardly worth it. For me, I'd skip Sonic the Hedgehog and just go straight on to Sonic 2. Then once you get an appreciation for the character, maybe after that, playing all of the Genesis games, go back and play Sonic the Hedgehog. You know, Sonic the Hedgehog is Final Fantasy 1. It started the franchise, but in hindsight, it's quite rough. It's Zelda 2, a major game, but not the one you need to play. GTA 1, great for historians, but I think we can leave it unplayed for at least now on. It's Super Mario 2, which I know people like. It's not really Mario, is it? So, should you go back and play Sonic the Hedgehog in 2020? Probably not. As I said, if you really want to go back and play all of them, Sonic the Hedgehog is fine to start with, but if you want to play the better Sonic games first, you can skip it. It's great for the collection, but that's about it. Now stick around though, I promise this review should only have gotten you hungry because what's next? Oh yes, Sonic 2. And Sonic 2 is where the whole franchise really gets started, and I have a lot more to say there. If you want to score, remember this is adjusted for the Sonic series itself and understand the entire legacy of the franchise. This is going to get a 3 out of 5. It's good, it's playable, but there's so many better games in this franchise. There's also, of course, a lot worse, and we'll probably play a few of those before long. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this video in style. As I said, this is something new, retrospective reviews. Let me know what you think down in the comments. And next month we'll be back with Sonic 2, and I think it's going to be clear how much I love this franchise when we get there, if you can't already tell what I think of that game already. If you've enjoyed this review, consider subscribing, I appreciate it, and feel free to share this with your friends. If you hate this on the other hand, share it with your enemies, they deserve it, and ring that bell so you'll be the first to be notified when the Sonic 2 retrospective review comes out. I'm going to be popping up 2 videos for you. About a year ago, I actually covered Sonic Mania and Sonic Mania Encore DLC. Check those out, and I'll be back soon to talk more Sonic. Until then, I'm King Link, and thanks for watching.